Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to my channel. To recap Chapter 7, Talia and Mathis made it to Heliodum, where they were met by Ganon, who turns out to be Talia's dad. He took them on a tour through Heliodum, where we left them off where Talia was about to read a story, moving into Chapter 8. The heart of all things. Before the dawn of time. Apsu existed from the beginning, a great thing that sat hidden in the darkened folds of Darasam for ages untold. She slumbered in a bubble of space, surrounded by the nurturing womb of a glowing atmosphere and covered in oceans that ebbed and surged in heavy breaths. There, life was only a dream. Until one day, before there were sunrises and sunsets to make a day, the planet was no longer an it. The form came alive to reach out with life and limb. Before too long, there sat a great and already ancient tree that branched out in multitude, and Apsu dreamed of what might come in multitude. As she dreamed, there came sprawling grasslands and forest ranges, and colors that covered all to be seen. Soon enough, there were creatures that ran across her prairies and frolicked through her valleys and scampered across her mountainous heights. They played among the clouds and slunk in the unseen depths within caves, and deeper still in the abyssal waters. Even deeper within her lived greater things. But life was fleeting. Soon all that had lived had come to die as well, yet it was not the end for Apsu, for as her consciousness of life slipped away from the grip of the planet, she saw herself from above, from a higher state of being. Below spun her body, and above spun her essence. All that surrounded her essence was drawn into collapse in the gravity of her aspect. In a wondrous blast, there was light. Apsu breathed her first breaths to shine a light upon the space around, and because her consciousness of life had become so great and burned with such passion, it formed the first star of creation. Astonished, she shone brightly across the face of the barren planet she once knew herself to be. Apsu had become the first and greatest of manifested creation, the first of the old brood in the space before time. She looked upon the husk of her body with sadness, but the sadness did not last long, and she beamed with joy to see that the world was not dead at all. Again, there was life as the planet quaked to birth Ki, her first brother. Even though he did not possess the power of life through flora and fauna, he still stood strong with all that he had. With the atmosphere, the seas, the molten inferno that burned within, and the granite stone that held it all together, his strength was mighty indeed. But it too was not to last, and even though he did not die from his ordeal, Ki would live to wish that he had. For when one has tasted of power and lost it all as well, one will always seek to attain it again. Ki cried out in a powerful clap of thunder while volcanic crags split the crust to spray and fountain high up. Molten flows bled and bled to scorch the land far and wide. Towering and billowing clouds of tempestuous storms filled the skies to send frantic bolts of lightning out across the globe. Ki trembled in fright. The oceans froze over while the waters boiled beneath, and in the terrible display of cataclysmic dismay, the planet fell apart in the space before time. Apsu watched as the glowing atmosphere pulled away from the rock and breathed his first breaths. Her second brother, Im, had been born. Ki screamed while the waters pulled away from the rock to see Tiamatu, her sister, breathe her first breaths. Apsu now grimaced to watch as Ki cried out in the greatest howl of pain yet. The molten inferno surged forth from every volcanic fissure, spewing higher and higher, bleeding away from the rock into the spaces around to give birth to Giru and Isatum, the twin brother and sister. That was the last of the birthing pangs that Ki would have to suffer. That was the beginning of life in the space before time, and these were the dragons of the old brood. Giru and Isatum took their own hearts of molten metals and cooled them to form a single ingot that glowed with a dim light, and with all their might they flung it outward. Ki took his own heart of gemstone and crushed it into countless shards. He then took the ingot as it sailed through the sea, and he covered it with all the shards to make it glow a little brighter. Sending it back out into the depths, Tiamatu was next to take up her own heart of water and froze it around the ingot to make it all safe, and again the ingot brightened up. At last, Im took his heart and gave the ingot its own breath, and it flared to brilliantly shine as it floated along through the spaces. Over time, it came close to Apsu and sank into the great star. What had been a single moment for the old brood exploded outward in a fiery cascade, and cast along its sprawling shockwave, the dawn of time shined into the Darasam Sea. That's the end of Chapter 8, ladies and gentlemen, and we're going to go straight into Chapter 9 because it's also a super short one, so hang in there. Chapter 9, Her Dream Made Manifest. The beginning, after the dawn of time. There was no sound of the flash of light as it streaked across the pink sky, not at first. It stood long in coming as soundless flash after flash brightened the planet's barren surface. Sparkling debris rained from the comet as it careened through the atmosphere. Finally, a resounding crack split the air and fractured the ground far below. The comet cascaded into a fiery ball that crashed down to the surface, and it consumed everything in its path. Where rolling hills once spanned far and wide, now a vast, deep crater scarred the land. At the center of the crater sat the heart of the comet, glowing red-hot, radiating. The entire crater lay strewn with varied crystalline fragments, a long and abundant trail of which stretched across the globe in the tail of the comet's debris. Aeons passed. When the clouds of dust finally settled, the planet no longer lay barren. A fledgling forest had taken root amid the debris, and it also grew down into the depths of the crater to surround the heart of all things. As more aeons passed, the forest grew, and something else grew as well, something not entirely botanical. At the foot of the massive remnant, in a shallow pool of water and entangled by roots, grew a sleeping being. She dreamed for a long time. When she was ready and grown, with a sudden start, her eyes opened wide, and she sat up to break through the surface of the pool with a raking gasp. The first sound she made, a hoarse and inward whisper, became her name, Khan. A description in words lacks fairness in trying to convey just what happened next. However, suffice it to say, Khan spread the seeds of the heart of all things across the expanse of eternity. She cultivated them, so that after even more aeons, eternity sat no longer void, but filled with a vast multitude of growing things, a menagerie of beautiful wonders to behold, a manifold of creation. She called it the Garden of Eternity. That's it, ladies and gentlemen, chapter 8 and 9. Now, I'm going to go a little deeper and give you some content that isn't in the book. A description in words lacks fairness in trying to convey just what happened next. I couldn't figure out what happened next. How do you write something that you haven't figured out? Well, I spent 20 years on this story, and I left it at that. Well, I finally figured out what happened next. You see, Khan herself, when she was born in this pool of water, she was just a tiny little salamander. And she broke through the surface. She made her hoarse and inward breath, which became her name, Khan. Hopefully the camera picked that up. Anyways, and she roamed around this crater that was strewn with all the fragments from the crashed comet. Now these fragments became her food. She would eat small little fragments, but when she ate a fragment from one stone, like a sapphire, and then she would eat a fragment from another stone, like a ruby, it wouldn't sit well with her stomach, not at all. So over time she learned to eat just rubies with rubies, or just sapphires with sapphires. And forgive me, but this is what happens when you eat. It's got to go somewhere. So she ate the fragments of rubies, and they gathered together inside of her to fit back together, and she excreted them out, and the little crystalline covered in poop was a seed, and those seeds became the garden, her garden of eternity. So there you go, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for hanging in there. We'll see you guys next week for chapter 10, where we will be getting back to Talia, Mathis, and Gannon. Thank you very much for hanging in there. I really appreciate it. A Book of Creation by Gregory James Gardner Jr. If you like it, if you just found this and this is your first time checking this out, well, you're like 9 chapters in. Go back, check out the first chapter. I hope you enjoy it. See you guys around.